Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. So I was in seminary, served my year-long internship in Washington State, north of Seattle, near the coast, which some of you kind of know by now. And at some point in the year, one of my members invited me to go crabbing and clamming with him. And this was a bit of a dream come true. I just have always loved the ocean and I love seafood. So I just jumped at the opportunity. We waded out into the water about waist deep with some homemade contraptions he had come up with and scooped up crabs that we found scurrying along the bottom. And the first lesson when chasing crabs is to wear closed-toed shoes. Better to have wet shoes than claws clamping onto your toes. So then he taught me how to dig for clams, and we mostly harvested manila clams, but we also got one gooey duck. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up. Just think big, okay? I had all the crab meat I wanted for a while, and I was able to make some homemade clam chowder. It's one of my favorite memories from that year. But that entire outing and the meals that followed would have been impossible if we followed the religious dietary laws that even Jesus and his disciples would have followed in his lifetime. Shellfish is not kosher. Anything from the water needs fins and scales to be eaten. The Apostle Peter later had a dream in the book of Acts that led Christians to put aside those dietary laws and all the distinctions between clean and unclean that extend to people as well. But depending on your own tastes, maybe those shellfish prohibitions are a kosher law that you would want to keep. I don't know. But the story we just heard from Matthew 15 is about ritual purity and cleanliness. In the story, Jesus has received criticism that his disciples aren't washing their hands before eating. And what they're referring to is not good hygiene. Hand washing was seen as part of the larger religious system of ritual purity that included food and many other practices. But it was actually not a part of the biblical code, this particular thing about hand washing. This was something that developed on top of those core dietary and purity laws, and it was not even embraced by all Jews at that time. This wasn't only a debate between Jesus and the Pharisees, but part of a wider debate within the Jewish community itself. So Jesus is providing his insight and teaching here, and his simple point is that true spiritual purity is not about what goes into our bodies, but what comes out of our hearts. We might have different measures of what it means to have moral or spiritual integrity today. But I think Jesus leaves us with a simple and powerful principle to consider. Our spiritual life is about the condition of our heart. So how do we tend to our hearts? We generally connect matters of the heart with emotions or deeply held beliefs and values. Sometimes what's inside our hearts doesn't connect with the way that we speak or act. But Jesus is making the point that what is in our heart will make its way out, for better or worse, at one point or another. Our outward actions and words matter, but we have to begin with what's inside. Jesus said, what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this is what defiles. For out of the heart come evil intentions, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person. This is a pretty typical list of vices that came out of Hellenistic Judaism, meaning Greek-influenced Jewish teaching. With any list of vices or moral infractions, some will always go directly to the ones they like to criticize most, and then conveniently ignore and avoid the rest that might hit home a little more deeply. Do we give equal weight to false witness and slander as we do to sexual immorality in our society? And do we understand the totality of what these vices mean, or do we impose our own narrow agendas onto them? Rather than turn to any set of behaviors and practices as immediate targets to establish somehow our own self-righteousness, we need to do some interior work first. Blaise Pascal was a French philosopher, mathematician, inventor, and Christian author. He wrote in his work Pensée, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. In a world of social media and constant digital engagement, I think that's an insight even more true today than it was then. Pascal wrote this at the conclusion of the 30 years war in Europe, where people had seen the world descend into brutality over differences in theology. He was reflecting on what had gone wrong and how we could change and avoid something like that from happening ever again. Today we face our own concerning and challenging conflicts, and it's important for us to weigh which outward practices and actions truly matter and what it means to develop spiritual integrity within ourselves first. If we do that, I believe we will use care in judging and categorizing others by outward expressions that are less than essential. Again, while actions matter, what if we started first with the heart? Contemporary Christian author Henry Nouwen made a similar point to Pascal. He said, solitude is the furnace of transformation. Without solitude, we remain victims of our society and continue to be entangled in the illusions of the self. Nouwen's point is that unless we build the capacity to reflect on our life in the world, we can be swept up by the loudest voices or have an unexamined and false view of ourselves. So if Jesus says we need to pay attention to our hearts, then I think we should do two things. Number one, pay attention to what we're thinking and why we think that. And second, pay closer attention to how we're feeling and why we feel that. We don't need to be led completely by our feelings, for example, but part of the way we manage feelings is not by ignoring them, but processing them, talking about them with others, gaining perspective. They may have an important message for us that we need to hear, but they also don't have to have the final word. The same can be said of our thoughts and ideas. We may have adopted ideas about an issue or topic. Perhaps we hold an idea that was even, valid previously. It's okay to periodically ask ourselves, is that still a valid way of thinking? Is there new information now that would change my thoughts about that? Is it based on yet other ideas I have? And if so, are those still valid? All of this kind of reflection requires a degree of courage and energy. Obviously, when we're constantly busy or stressed, we're reluctant to open up big questions like that. It can seem like a luxury or just a waste of time. But again, in the words of Pascal, we give rise to problems when we don't do that work. We can't afford not to. The problems we create may not just impact us, but those around us. They may impact a whole community if we can't be self-reflective. We need to cultivate time to be still in silence. Many today who hold strong ideas or a set of beliefs think that examining their thoughts and feelings about something might be somehow corrupting. They may even see open-mindedness as a trap or a temptation. They think they might become weakened in their views that they just know are right. It's not an easy task. We may encounter problematic ideas and ones we need to be wary of. They require us to develop greater judgment and perspective. But the alternative of staying unreflective is also problematic in the long run. We all face circumstances that challenge us as humans and certainly as people of faith. Although outward practices are not the source of our problems, according to Jesus, we each need to strike certain balances. We may have unique circumstances that require us to cut certain behaviors or practices out of our lives. You might end up with a health condition and discover you simply can't eat certain foods anymore. Some things we put in our bodies aren't good. You may have certain cognitive, emotional, or behavioral patterns that a trusted doctor or therapist suggests just require changes. Some things we feed our mind with aren't healthy. The same is true of our heart and soul. All of that makes sense. But in the end, the way we meet challenges is not simply through avoidance and elimination or outward practices, but by being in touch with our inner voice and heart and being able to adapt and grow based on new circumstances over time. This doesn't mean getting lost in that inner dialogue or becoming self-indulgent, but we need to work on being self-aware and to allow that to give us perspective and inform our relationships and work. It is an ongoing work. This is the heart work and the hard work Jesus is talking about. In fact, doing so helps us better embody our core beliefs and values. Unless we're reflective, we are often unaware or unwilling to see the gaps between what we say we believe and how we actually live. And the truth is that when we do that, every one of us becomes painfully aware of some of those gaps in our own lives. We know that sometimes our hearts aren't where they need to be. Even as Jesus calls us to get our hearts right, we know that part of this is receiving God's love and grace as well. Because part of the deeper truth we need to know inside is not that we need healing or change only, but that God still cares for us and claims each one of us as a child of God. The beauty of the gospel is that the truth we encounter when we sit quietly in a still room, to use Pascal's image, is not just painful at times, but it's also gracious and joyful thanks to God's own heart and God's love for us. God sees through the ruptures in our hearts and still sees our value. This past week, I was listening to an interview with Robert George, who is a professor of jurisprudence at Princeton University and also director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. He has a long-standing friendship with Professor Cornel West, who he said he often disagrees with. But he believes deeply in relationships that bridge divides. He says, I encourage my students, my own children, to try to develop the virtues of intellectual humility, open-mindedness, and courage. George has written about the importance of what he calls civic friendships that cross these divides. He recently wrote, the near collapse of civic friendship is a catastrophic threat to public life. Restoring it depends on our capacity to practice civil discourse, which in turn requires us to acknowledge our fallibility deeply, existentially, and not just formally. Without such an acknowledgement, it is impossible for people to cultivate the virtue of intellectual humility on which our civil liberty depends. Truly engaging with another person on our own terms means that we have fully engaged with ourselves in what we truly think, believe, and feel. When we've done that internal work, we can learn from others while still claiming what is important to us. It allows us to sharpen our perspective and grow deeper in heart, mind, and soul, even extending grace to those that we disagree with. All of this may sound complicated, but it's a simple matter of the heart. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.